Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this third and final panel of the event today. Thank you for staying through after lunch. We can see the room has gotten a little bit thinner, but they're going to miss the best part. But
Yes.
joining me on this panel, we've got Mr. Bongani Xaba, who is a GM for Strategic Asset Management at Rand Water. We've got Bonifacio Antonio, who is an advisor for economic and disaster risk reduction for strategic issues at the National Institute for Disaster Risk Management and Reduction in Mozambique. There's a lot of disaster in that title. We've got Mr. Erik Wandrag, CEO of Oceans Finance Company, and we've got Mr. Tente, CEO or Chief Executive of the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority. And finally, we've got Mrs. Nicole Roos. She's Chairperson and Managing Director at East and Southern African Regions for the Nestle Group, South Africa. So please come onto the stage, my panelists. But while they're making their way, it's interesting when you have the final panel after all the contributions that have been made by everybody, and you're better able to actually locate your discussion in what everybody has said. I think it was what is fortuitous that we come after that address by the Honorable Netumbo, because she really speaks to the case study of what is happening within countries, just focusing on her own country, Namibia. And I would like for our discussion actually to link up to a lot of what she said. The whole issue of droughts is something that the people on the stage are very, very familiar with, and how they reverberate in terms of how they affect countries, in terms of how they affect companies, and how people need to then adjust how they do things around that. And the other interesting thing that I would like for us to, and I've set the guys up already, for us to surface is within the water space. What have we seen by way of collaboration, both across borders, public-private sector, which is something that's come up, I think, quite a lot as we went through the day. So before we start, I'd like to ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Bonifacio, and then we can go down the line.
Good afternoon. My name is Bonifacio. I'm from the Disaster Risk Management. I think that I'm the only one who is representing disaster institution in this meeting, which is, I'm so happy for that. And I would like to call your attention to be resilient for my broken English, because I'm coming from a Portuguese-speaking country. Thank you.
And moving on.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tente. If you know Tshepotsola's song, Coming from the Mountaintop, I come from Lesotho, Lesotho Highlands Development Authority. We are in the business of water. I will unpack some of that during the engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we've got Erik.
Hello, everybody. Erik Wandrag. I'd like to thank Standard Bank for throwing this birthday party for me. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for attending.
We live to please,
CEO of Oceans Finance Company, and we can talk about what we do later.
And
Good
Nicole?
afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for joining the late shift. Nicole, I'm the CEO of Nestle East and Southern Africa. We're headquartered out of Bryanston, but responsible for 23 Southern and Eastern African countries, and also sit here today as co-chair of the Sustainable Agriculture Task Force, and we'll speak about some of the transversal topics that connect with water as well.
Awesome. And Bongani?
Okay, good day, colleagues. My name is Bongani. My surname is Xaba. I come from Soweto, but of course, I'm responsible for water planning, water futuristic outlooks, design, engineering, as well as execution, implementing projects on the ground. So that's my role in Randwater. I'm sure I'll be able to share with you a little bit more interesting facts about what we do, but thank you for having us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your introduction. So we don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of us, and all of us here can talk quite a bit, I'm sure. So let's start with, get on into the conversation. So the first thing I'd like to get, from the first part of the conversation is, what is actually happening on the ground? How are you, your organizations, your countries experiencing global warming and the impact thereof? And I'd like to start here with Bonifacio. Mozambique has been, subject to profound disruptions on a fairly regular basis. From cyclones, we had one earlier this year. What does that do in your country? What are the impacts on, people, on the country, on your fiscus, just to get a sense of the impact of this inclemental weather and these disruptions?
Thank you. You may know that I'm coming from a country where I can call it the home of the main disasters. You know that the location, the geographical location allows us to have all those kind of disasters, from cyclones and floods, droughts, and all those things. Just to give you an idea, during the last 5 years, we faced it. I'm just going to talk about a single hazard. We faced 13 cyclones, most of them with high magnitude, with severe damages on infrastructure and people. In total, it affected about 13 million people in the country. We had about 3,000 deaths and about 150 injured. Our organization used to coordinate the process of dealing with those hazards and others which used to be common in our country. And the way we do the work is the system is designed into 3 different dimensions. On one side, we have the political dimension, which is the decision-making body led both by Prime Minister, who is in charge for the Coordination Council for Disaster Risk Management, and the head of the state, who is responsible for the Council of the Minister, the board which declare an emergencies, all those things, and we start to do our work. And the technical component is led by my organization, which is in short is INGD, and there we do have representatives from the different institutions, from the government, UN agencies, who are part of what we call humanitarian country team, civil societies, and private sector. At the lower level, at the community level, we do have what we call local committees for disaster risk management. Those are responsible for taking measures at the local level. And at the moment, we do have about 2,000 local committees all over the country. And ideally, we need to have at least 4,000 to cover the entire country. And we need some funds to train and to equip all those members of the local committees for disaster risk management. Apart of that, we do have the disaster management law, which guide all the process, the special, including for those slow onset events such as droughts, even the quick onset events such as floods and cyclones. There are clear guidelines on how to work and how to deal with all those stuff. At the same time, we do have what we call disaster risk management funds. Basically, it relies on the funds coming from the government. It's the state budget, which is normally they allocate about a percentage to that management fund. In the past, we used to have contribution for the World Bank, but the project that was funding that ended last year. But currently, only the government is just putting some funds to respond to the different kind of the disaster. You may think that these guys, they've got a lot of money. No, the funds that are invested there, we can compare it as a drop in the ocean. If we see the kind of the hazards that normally affect our country. At the same time, we are still working with some other partners such as the African Development Bank, which is focusing on the areas where we do have characteristics of arid and semi-arid characteristics. We do have 38 districts in Mozambique with that characteristics, but the African Development Bank project is just covering 9 districts, which means that the other districts, they already plans, but they still lack of funding to implement those plans. Just as at the initial stage, I can stop here and then we can, thank you.
No, happy with that. So what you describe is just massive infrastructure gaps, resource gaps, both from a human capacity perspective as well as financial gaps. Would that be a reasonable summary? Just moving on then to Nicole, just on the subject of what does it look like on the ground when you have water shortages, and what have you guys done to respond to that?
So firstly, we're speaking about getting climate ready. I think for food manufacturing, we've been having to think about this topic for decades already. So a lot of our work has begun circa 2 decades ago on looking at what it might look like, and a lot of that has become our reality today.
Yeah.
So I think most of the panel would agree that I think one of the most pressing risks to the country's economic development, but also now to food security, becomes our challenges with water. And this is beyond a South African issue. Of course, it's an African issue and an important economic and growth issue. To your question of what is it looking like on the ground, at the moment we are running 7 food manufacturing facilities across these 23 countries I mentioned. It is not uncommon for us to feel water stoppages and water shortages in those environments where we are required to, of course, run our food operations. And we're focusing more to see our role as a solver of some of those challenges. And I think we spoke about it, Sim outlined it this morning, is it's about partnership, complex problems, but again, what part can we play? At the moment, we've chosen really to embed water stewardship into our entire value stream. This is not something that starts at the beginning or at the end of the process. It's really got to start in the boardroom, and it has to be well embedded throughout the whole value chain. We are also employing a model of what we call creating shared value. So we want our facilities in rural areas. We want the job creations that come with that. But of course, okay, that's creating some of the challenges where we are dealing with some of the infrastructural pressure, having those facilities located where they are. So on the ground right now, what are we deploying? In some of our facilities, we've done great work, for example, on reverse osmosis technology, where we really are improving our water quality. We know that's a struggle for many of us manufacturing today. We're also looking at very high-tech enabled water management systems, very metered production facilities, for example. We know at every part of the food production where we're using water and its application to the processes. And lastly, in areas where we do deal with disruption, I can mention 2 by example, in Harrismith and Babelehi, where we are dealing with the persistent infrastructural challenges. There we've really had to double down our investments, particularly on operational readiness. That comes with quite, of course, a heavy cost burden. And here it's really about how do we strengthen those partnerships, how do we also safeguard those operations with very firm business continuity plans, which we know are required to run our businesses in this part of the continent.
Thanks for that. Bongani, coming to you, who's the water provider, or at least an interim one somewhere in the process. What have you experienced? What have you seen from an operational perspective? What have been your most pressing or significant climate-related challenges?
Okay. Thanks, Mamokete. Maybe let me start by explaining that rainwater is a bulk water supplier. So what that means is we purchase water from the Department of Water and Sanitation, and we sell that water to the municipalities. right? So we are somewhere in the middle of the value chain. So there's boundaries there. But us being a bulk water supplier, we have unfortunately a capped license, right? Because all of our water, as you know, comes from Lesotho, and I'm sure Tente will speak about that. And we get our water at the Vaal Dam. Now, the amount of water that we abstract from the Vaal Dam has been capped by a legislative license. And I can share with you that license is about 4,300 million liters of water per day, whereas the demand that we see from the customers, the municipalities, is in excess of 5,000 million liters per day. So you see there's some kind of a deficit there. Now, you'll ask yourself, why so much, 700 megaliters per day? The reality of the matter is that this deficit is actually what we call an artificial demand. And that artificial demand is as a result of, as you would have heard, that municipalities in general, they lose about, on average, about 50% of the water that we sell to them. So there lies your problem, number one. But as the license is kept also at 4,300, it means the government, the department is very much aware of the fact that the issues of climate change are going to have a long-term effect on us into the future. So they then try to regulate how much of that water that comes from Lesotho and from the integrated Vaal River system we are drawing currently. So that is some of the challenges. But so it's an issue of quantity, available quantity of raw water. And then the second one that really impacts us as Rand Water is the issue of quality of the raw water. Now, what do I mean by that? With the floods, with pollution, with microbiological behavior of organisms in the water, what you end up with is effectively a very high cost of treatment of water. So that's what it means. It means that we end up spending a whole lot more on treatment chemicals and guess what, as well as energy. So we spoke earlier about the energy element. So that's the second aspect. So how do we then see the future from our perspective? We believe that unlike the energy sector, which we heard earlier on about, Rudy was talking about building more and more and more, we actually think of a different solution going forward to deal with climate change specifically, because Tente in Lesotho does not have a machine that produces water. Water comes from the rain, it comes from the snow. So at some point, if we get warmer temperatures, we're going to perhaps end up with low rainfalls, and that means there isn't enough water coming to South Africa. So that is the risk that we are facing. So the solution that we see into the future is perhaps coming with different approach, which is recycling water, which is reclaiming water, and which is reusing water. So the 3 R's. The problem here is the issue of recycling and reuse. It's something that as a country, South Africa, we actually have a very huge stigma around it. And it's something that we're going to have to really educate each other and the general public about the fact that we cannot have a situation where we build more pipelines, more treatment plants, and so forth, because the resource is going to be limited. And as I'm saying, we are already kept by the license. In the last 2 years, the department gave us some kind of a reprieve. Department of Water and Sanitation South Africa, they actually increased our license to cater for the deficit as we saw it. But that reprieve actually came to an end last month in October. So what it means is that the license has now gone down. So as we sit here today, I can tell you that we are drawing more water from the Vaal Dam than what we are licensed to do. So that is a big problem for us. It's a big problem for the region and the areas that we supply. We supply 5 provinces, colleagues. It's not just Gauteng. We actually supply 5 provinces. The 5,000 million liters that I'm talking about is going to Free State, is going to Northwest, is going to Limpopo, is going to Gauteng as well as which one did I not count? Mpumalanga, thank you very much. So that is the scale of the supply that Rainwater does. And you can now imagine having that element of trying to find a balance between non-revenue water, the 50% that we are losing, as well as the cap that we get from the department. And I said earlier on also the issue of energy is a problematic situation for us. We are doing our own little work, our own little just energy transition within Rainwater. Okay, what do I mean by that? We have actually installed backup generators. We are a very high intensive energy user. You can imagine that we need to pump water all the way from the Val, in the Val Dam, as far as Northwest in Rustenburg, as far as Emelo in Mpumalanga. So definitely, we are a high intensive energy user. So we have put our own backup generators, number one. But we have not stopped there. We've tested 2 projects, which are basically installation of solar photovoltaics, or solar PVs as you know them. We're currently installing about 10 megawatts of that. And also, we are starting very soon with the project to install about 15 megawatts of hydro power generation. We are doing it internally, we are funding it ourselves. The point I'm making with that is the future for Rainwater does not look water anymore. It looks water, it looks energy. So we are going to diversify, we are going to be an energy company. So that is what climate change has done for us. So it's the issue of quantity of water, as I mentioned. And I'm saying for that, we need to talk reclamation. We have to start to think about that. When we speak about investment in water, I think what we must be talking about now is investment in reclamation plants, rather than in building more pipelines and trying to get to as far areas, wide areas. And what that then means is that there is an opportunity here for all stakeholders to start to participate in this. The private sector, Nestle, you're already doing it, you've just told us now, with your reverse osmosis and things like that. We're inviting the funding institutions to come on board, because these kind of projects are not projects that we've got the balance sheet actually to fund. But lastly, if I may just say, on the energy part, I said we tested 2 projects. I think I want to share with you that where we are going into the future is actually to bring in independent power producers to come and cover the 450 megawatts of electricity that we use. So that's the future that we see in trying to adapt to the challenge you see in front of you. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Bongani. So when we were talking just now, I said to Bongani, you know, it's so nice that I've got this many engineers on the panel, because engineers don't talk that much. and he's just disproved my assertion as far as that's concerned. But anyway, as we were, I'd like to move on to the other engineer on the panel that didn't. So you are further upstream. You're upstream of Rainwater as far as the provision of water is concerned. I think post-2020, we've experienced both quite a bit of rainfall in that 2021 sort of period, and we've gone through a period of drought. So I would drive through in Lesotho, and you can see when the dams are low and when the dams are high. What sort of what investments do you guys need? What is your investment gap in terms of trying to invest to meet the challenges of inclemental weather, as well as this variable or this massive variances in rainfall?
Thank you. I think we need to go back to basics. Like you were saying, we are at the upstream end of the infrastructure, and often when you ask this kind of question, everyone is expecting us to talk about the hardcore engineering infrastructure, which is our dams, our tunnels, the pipelines, and everything. I would want to agree with the previous speaker that this resource is a finite resource and we need to look after it. One of the things that maybe they need to focus more on is to deal with this 50% non-revenue water. But let me not go into that one and try to respond to your question directly. Earlier on, one of the panelists was quite critical about sovereign-backed financing and the likes, but currently, in terms of our capital expenditure, is still financed by the two governments, and we gain that sovereign backing, and mostly is the DFI loans. And in terms of the OPEX, it's included in the annual budgets for the two nations. But in terms of climate-related finance and the others, we are working on we have a program on the wetland rehabilitation, because the wetlands serve quite a critical and important purpose in terms of water supply systems. Before you can get your water behind that dam wall, that some people call it the dam, you need your wetlands. You'll get your rain, you'll get your snow, but your water needs to go into that processing plant, which we call the wetland. The dam itself is just a warehouse, in our opinion. And if your processing plant is not functioning well and not doing its functions, then your warehouse is just a white elephant. You heard the previous speaker talking about millions of liters that they treat every day. They actually prefer the water from the highlands of Lesotho because of its cleanliness. That cleanliness comes about because of the wetlands. So we are very much into wetland rehabilitation and catchment management. And these are not separate add-ons. They are integral part of the capital investment that we putting into the funding model for us. We have recently developed a climate change policy which looks at taking advantage and prioritize mobilization fund from regional and international mechanisms like Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, African Development Bank, Climate Change Fund, and the others. So we are exploring green and blended finance instruments to integrate into the resilience into the future of our infrastructure. Currently, we are doing the phase 2 program, which is about 53 billion rands, and 15% of that is earmarked for climate adaptation and environmental sustainability. So this is some of the innovations that we've put into our models. Recently, we have adopted a 10-year strategy as the LHDA, where we've changed our business model to actually accommodate private capital, commercial financiers, as well as equity-based partnerships. I'll stop there for now.
You'll stop there for now. Thanks for that. So, I mean, just listening to you two gentlemen, and Nicole to some extent, all I'm hearing is that trying to manage this whole process means investing all the way up and down, from the wetlands, which is the water before it even gets to the dam in Lesotho, to trying to invest in how we use water at a factory level, to changing our attitudes around water. As you were speaking, Bongani, I was actually thinking, I don't think South Africans are that wary of like recycled water. We will learn something from Cape Town after their day zero drama. So it's interesting that it's not just about building the obvious infrastructure, like municipal management, municipal infrastructure, the loss of water along the value chain, and managing the resource further upstream. Moving on to Erik. Erik, if I listen to Bonifacio and knowing what we know, for example, about the destruction that inclemental weather can cause within countries, the need to then invest also in adaptation infrastructure, the implications of that for sovereigns, for credit, costing, etc. How do you as a financier think about squaring up all these challenges?
I get all the easy questions on my birthday, apparently, so that's good. Okay. This is quite disconcerting. There's a clock over here. I know what the Springbok kickers now feel like. It's like counting down. So I'll keep it short and try and get over the goals. So I'm loving listening to everybody speak. So my background is infrastructure finance, believe it or not. Now we're funding biodiversity and conservation, and people go, why the hell and how? And it's actually two things. On the one side, you've got to look at the impact side of things. Why are we doing these things? So when we first started building infrastructure, we did the first subsea cables going into Nigeria. We did Lake Turkana in Kenya. We did first airports in Tunisia. You were building those things because you were trying to solve an issue for something. And that something was usually related to people and planet to some extent, and finding solutions to do something good in the process. Where am I going with this? Oh, yeah. Okay. So if we now look at where water is in that space, it's a little bit trickier to fund. Because, yes, I love what you guys are doing, Nicole. I've stalked you on LinkedIn a little bit, so I've looked at some of the Nestlé stuff globally as well, and it's exactly the right thing. But it needs to be done at a scale that sits beyond your balance sheet capabilities. If I listen to Rand Water, I was a Joburg resident until 3 years ago, so thank you. I loved being a customer. And if I listen to what's happening in Lesotho, it's very hard to go and fund those in the way that infrastructure was funded previously. I'll quickly go to the other side of the coin then, is the financing side. If you look at the SDG funding gaps that are out there, anywhere between $4 to $4.5 trillion per year that's needed if we're going to close the SDGs, all of them. Whether we'll close all of them, doesn't matter, it's a big number. People then run around and they say, well, who's going to fund it? And the first people they run to Western governments and they go, ODA, you guys owe us, you guys were the colonizers before, whether it's here or in South America, wherever else it is, you need to have some form of restitution. And yes, those governments do step up. Record year 2023 was a record year for ODA. $273 billion. Total ODA globally. Great way to get to the $4.5 trillion. Then people run to the multilateral development banks, the DFIs, everybody else, and they say, well, now you guys must step up. Also a record year for them, $232 billion. Nice numbers. Then they run to the philanthropists. Bezos, Gates, the usual suspects, and they say, well, you guys step in a little bit as well. Great number from them, $811 billion, but that includes all global corporate social responsibility in that year as well. So this is not just philanthropy, that's also corporate social responsibility. So you can still see you've got that massive gap. I am getting to the point, I promise. I'm looking at the shot clock.
I trust you.
Okay. So how do you solve that? Is go and take a look at the global capital markets that follow some form of sustainable investment guidance. Even today, even the BlackRocks who say ESG is bad, but then come back with something else and say, well, that's maybe a little bit better. That number is $43 trillion, funds under management. You go to private wealth markets, this is Jeff Bezos' Amazon, not Jeff Bezos' Earth Fund. That is sitting at around about $480 trillion. So those are the markets that we used to tap for regular infrastructure projects. When you start building an energy plant anywhere, that's the first thing you do. You take a look at what do the revenues look like, how far can I extend it, because if I make my tenant too short, it's going to be too expensive, and the end user can't afford to pay for the power. Water is going to be exactly the same thing. You can put some of these shorter-term financing facilities in it, but lo and behold, it's going to be massively expensive, and the funders need to be repaid, strangely enough, because they've got shareholders. They hold all of our pension funds. When you retire one day, you're going to not say to your pension funder, how many trees did you plant for me? You're going to say to them, please, can I have money to buy food and go and have a house over my head? So they have those responsibilities. Most of them want to do good, definitely, but they're incentivized to do well. Slightly different metrics. That was the bad news. Okay, good news, good news. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we do it? Okay, shot clock, get to the point. I can use birthday liberties. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, birthday liberties.
Right. So how do we look at it? You have to start looking at decoupling the revenue streams from the funding mechanism. That's the only way you're going to be able to do this. And it sounds a little bit esoteric, but if you look at a water model and a power project, you've got a power purchase agreement with a utility or national government or somewhere for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. You take that, you go and insure it with the World Bank or with DFC or somebody else, and you say, please enhance the credit rating of this for me. And with that, you go to the institutional capital markets. They love it because they're buying rated instruments. So for them, it's very low risk, and you can go and fund those things. Water, for the size projects that we're looking at, does not have enough securable revenue to go and do that. So you've got to go and find something else. And I'm not saying things like a debt for nature swap or a debt for water swap is a panacea, definitely not. It is one of the answers, but we've got to start looking at other types of instruments that are used on a daily basis. Repacks. There's Lawrence sitting over there. He knows derivatives probably far better than most of us in this room. If you ever want to talk to somebody, go and talk to that young man. But you've just got to start thinking slightly differently and out of the box if you're going to fund these things. You can't keep on doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. Then you become like me, apparently.
Yeah. No, I don't think it turned out too badly.
Okay, thank you.
Happy birthday again, by the way. I mean, you raised some interesting questions around, like, how do you get the revenue streams from whatever infrastructure you put in place? I suppose that's a challenge that, we really need to think about. I mean, and coming back to Bonifacio, you kind of like not in the water value chain, you're more disaster management. Your country has to process and deal with what you've outlined are quite expensive costs associated with inclement weather. What are you guys thinking about, from an insurance perspective, just to try and make investment in the country more affordable in the context of, the outsized risk of natural disasters?
Yeah, we are moving on that direction, so that you can secure funds to build the infrastructures in a way that obey the climate change resilience. But let me just return to the issue of disaster risk management funds, so that you can get an idea what's happening there. In the disaster risk management, there is a cycle which is comprised by the 4 components. One is prevention and mitigation. The second one is preparedness. The third one is response. And the fourth one is post-disaster reconstruction. What's happening right now is that the disaster management fund is just covering the response. It's not covering the other three components of the cycle. Currently, there is underway a process of revising the manual of procedures that guides the funding, the use of the fund from the disaster risk management fund, so that it can cover the other 3 components, and then the issue of infrastructures are already, probably they're going to be covered. In the past, we just completed a project which ended last year, related to build safer schools and safer health facilities, you see. And currently, in the areas that the cyclone destroyed most of the infrastructures, the new buildings that we are doing there, we are using a strategy called Building Back Better, which helps us to train the people. There is a lot of institutions, including engineering, involved, training the communities and showing them how to rehabilitate the infrastructures, taking into consideration the impacts of the disaster as such. So we are trying to bring on board the other partners who currently they cannot fund, they cannot put their funding resources in the disaster risk management fund because it doesn't cover the areas that they consider as being as their focus of the activity. Once we cover that, I think that the fund can be recapitalized, but even though we'll still need to get contribution from other partners in order to take the action on the ground.
You know, I'm listening to you, and I'm remembering John saying, these disasters don't cost anything. These communities, the issue is poverty. And I'm trying to think, if these communities were rich, how would these effects be mitigated? I mean, you talk about schools, you talk about health infrastructure, you know, you'd be talking about factories, and, you know, I'm not, I'll probably ask somebody to help me fill the gap between how to make sense of his conception of it, climate risk and impact, versus what the solution kind of is, or, you know, where it sits. I think we're coming towards the end of our conversation. I'd just like to do one more round and hopefully get through everybody, if everybody behaves. And I'd like to think about, you know, what do we need to do going forward? What are the different models that are potentially or can be explored with the experience that the people on the panel actually have? And starting with you, Tente. So the Lesotho Highlands Water Project is a model really in inter-country, state-to-state collaboration to fill a gap in water infrastructure. What are our learnings, and how do you think those can be replicated across more geographies?
Thank you for that question. At the risk of sounding like a broken tape record, I'm sure I've said this before. Gauteng is a very unique, or Johannesburg is a very unique city, in that where it's situated, there is no water. One of the things that before you establish a city you need to find is a water source. Gauteng is different because the attraction was gold. So the water had to find the city. That's where the Lesotho Highlands Water Project comes in. And we've spoken about everything else, energy, what not. And if you go into water rationing situations in Johannesburg, which is the major economic player in the rest of Africa, you are messing around with the wrong commodity. So this is how important this transboundary cooperation is to the region. And if you go into the preamble to the treaty, it's not talking about dams, it's not talking about engineering, it's talking about peace and prosperity in the region, it's talking about socio-economic development in the region, it's talking about equitable sharing of the water resource. Climate change doesn't recognize boundaries. The impacts of climate change will be felt right through from Lesotho, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, right through. So it is quite important that we look after this commodity. So I'll repeat again and again, just as my name says. We need to look after those processing plants which are the wetlands. We need to invest on those wetlands because much as we don't get perennial rain in this region, but our rivers are flowing right through the year. Why? Because of that processing plant which keeps the water and gives us what we need. Otherwise, after the rain, the water will go into the warehouse, some of it will spill over, and we'll have nothing. So investment, we need to have a change in the mindset to say, and invest in what we call green infrastructure, which is the wetlands. Thank you.
Now I need to know how wetlands work. Because after all of this, it's like, how does this whole thing work? But anyway, what I think is interesting about what you said, you talk about how the treaty was not about, it's almost like it's about returns, but it's not about returns, but it actually centers human flourishing, human prosperity, which is at the center actually of all of our well-being and stability. I suppose that's kind of what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And that is the starting point, and then we solve for all of this afterwards. And you know, when you talked about Gauteng, and I was like, you know, I always say this is a city of hustlers. We're all hustlers here. We all came to pen for gold. You don't have to scratch very far to find that energy. And therefore a plan was made, you know, to try and figure out how to get the water. But coming to you, Erik, you know, you obviously have seen some opportunities, firstly in blue finance. I'm deeply interested in your, a little bit of a discussion around your debt for climate conversion. You know, in Ecuador, I thought that was really, really, really interesting deal. I think it speaks to this idea about you center the planet, you center human flourishing, human prosperity, and certain things can be done. So what are you thinking about the innovation around that?
I think it's very good. We in mind. Okay. No,
At least you're on the forefront of it.
No. Sorry, that was facetious. So I'm extremely excited. We're starting to see some really interesting confluences of things happening. We're starting to see governments who are starting to realize that as a result of the impacts of climate change, as a result of pollution, habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, they're going to lose votes. That starts becoming interesting. Then you start seeing financiers, like the European Central Bank, for instance, who did a bit of a survey 2 years ago and said, let's go and take a look how many of the companies that we fund in Europe is at risk of one ecosystem service loss. Short answer was 75% of the total lending book of European banks. So suddenly, the large institutional type of investors are also waking up and saying, it's not just a nice to do type of thing anymore. This affects my ability to actually pay bonuses at the end of the year. That becomes interesting. And then on the other side, you've got the sad part of it is exactly what you're saying. You're starting to see communities being more and more and more affected by what should be happening behind us here and isn't. And a lot of people who are starting to realize that if it's going to be, it's up to me, I can't look around and say, oh, you're going to do it, you've got to go, I need to go. So, long way around of saying, very excited. I think we're at the cusp of some really interesting funding mechanisms that are going to start coming out. And I think we're going to start seeing some transformational projects as a result of it as well.
That's awesome. Nicole, we're on minus here, but we promise we'll be done just now. Where do we sit on the public-private partnership
Yeah, we've been discussing it almost all day, right?
Yeah.
And this is such a complex and multifaceted problem that the only way to solve it is going to be exactly through that. I think maybe just a quick word. We know that the upcoming Water Services Bill is ahead of us, and I think we are really in support of that. So firstly, we welcome reforms that bring transparency. We welcome reforms that are going to drive efficiency, and exactly to the whole panel, it's a shared responsibility, shared usage, and more importantly, shared vision for the future. So looking forward to that. We need more of that. And finally, I think just the example on scaling, I think a very fair challenge from our fellow panelists. We need to start doing more collectively, and we need those government, public, private partnerships to really scale now in big ways. For example, in the Food Sustainability Task Force, we are speaking about how, with the most arable land in the world, we're going to get ready to feed, 2.5 billion of the 9 billion here on our own continent. We're going to need water to do that, and you're absolutely right, it is finite. An example, our Mossel Bay facility now is what we call a zero intake facility. It runs very, very low intake from the municipal water structures. How does that do that? It recycles off cow's water. So the evaporation from cow's milk processing, we're then able to use that in the net infrastructure. These are creative solutions. We're not close to those, but you're right, we need to scale them. Another really good example is that for the group, we are actually piloting a net carbon emission facility in our Mossel Bay infrastructure. We know in farming that work happens before the sun comes up. So when boots are on and we're out walking, we've implemented incredible R&D, which we spoke about this morning, that takes us to net carbon emissions. How do we do that? Advanced work in soil sequestration. We look at excellent work in biodiversity management. We're looking at crop rotational things. Again, fair and safe on water usage. So outstanding examples. They're here on African continents. Africa has definitely something to contribute and say when it comes to not only food safety and security, but of course this incredibly important topic of water and its preservation.
Thank you. And last but not least, Bongani, so what is the most important message that you would have for us from Rainwater around water infrastructure and building climate resilience?
Yeah.
Final thought. One thought.
1 minute.
We're behind already. We're already in trouble.
No, it's fine. Maybe just two things. I spoke about the issue of the stigma. And I think it's a soft issue, but we ignore it. The issue of education. In Randwater, we run a program called WaterWise. Okay, so basically we educate the public about water conservation and water demand management and things like that. Last year, we've managed to reach 1 million people, of course, through our own funding. But we think if that can be scaled, to a level where we take it to make it a curriculum at school, for instance, government funded, I think we'll go a long way in teaching people about water. Let's just share information about water. So that's the one part. And I think the second part, takeaway, colleagues, is start to think about warming up towards the 3 Rs. Reclaim, reuse, and recycle. I think the future is going to lie there. Because Tente, in my view anyway, he's building the last augmentation, the Lesotho Highlands 2 project. I don't think we should be talking about a Lesotho Highlands 3. I think we should be saying in this last augmentation phase, we now change the course and start to talk about recycling. So I think that's where the future lies. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. How much time do I have for Q&A? None. Okay, we've got time for one question.
Thank you. Sinazo here. This question is directed, I don't know who will take it between Mr. Tente and Mr. Xaba. I just want to know, how has Rainwater observed any correlation between the tariff increases and the changes in consumer demand, and how is this shaping your strategies for sustainable water management? Thank you.
Do you want to go first? Okay, let me attempt it. Ma'am, thanks for the question. So, Randwater, we purchase water from the Department of Water and Sanitation. They, in turn, purchase water from the Lesotho Highlands Development. So that's where we come in. We start by buying water from the department. But the input costs that I mentioned earlier on as a result of climate change, the pollution in the water, the quantity issues, as well as electricity costs. Those are the three key drivers for us, at least at Randwater. So that's how then the tariff itself is then impacted. It'll be interesting to know that there was a year or two where Randwater was actually given, we say they approved a zero tariff increase. I don't know why they say that. In other words, it means that we actually did not get a tariff increase for 2 years, you know. And of course, the costs are escalating. So that is the impact to that, and that's how we derive our tariff. But also included in there is our capital investment. So I speak about the last phase of the augmentation, in my view, and I have to be very clear about that, is that we are also, I think, in the last phase of our augmentation, because we are building plants that, in our view, are going to meet the demands of 2035, right? But I think that should be the last. I keep saying that. So the point there being that cost of capital costs as well as the input costs is what drives our tariff into the future. Well, that is us now selling to municipalities. But municipalities, they also then add their own markups, and I do not know how they calculate it, don't ask me, because what they do is they just sell the water that we sell to them, to you, in your households. Remember what I said though, that 50% tariff, that 50% water losses, I think is also perhaps a player in how municipalities will then charge you their tariff at the home level. Because they are trying to make up for what we charge them, which is 100% water supply, but they lose the 50%, which then they must recover somewhere. And I think that's where your tariff then comes in, at least at the household level. So I'm not sure if that touched to your question. Are you happy? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm so sorry that we took up the whole hour and we didn't leave enough time for Q&A. This was a very expansive discussion. I'm leaving here with more questions than answers, which I think is well enough. So thank you so much to my panelists for taking the time to come here and chat to us, starting with Mr. Xaba at the end there. Thank you so much for coming all this way from the south of Johannesburg to Joburg Central. Mr. Antonio, all the way from Mozambique, thank you so much. Mr. Wandrag, I think you're from Cape Town, but you know how to deal with grey water, so we're going to come to you for that. Tente, thank you so much for coming all the way from Lesotho. And Mrs. Roos, thank you. Thank you so much to our audience as well.